Well, again, the Institute is grateful and happy to have another distinguished speaker with us tonight. Dr. Robert Mueller is the newly appointed Deputy to the Undersecretary General for International Agents.
May I interrupt you? Audio
Sure.
currently is not working here.
It's turned on. Do you want this? Is it working now? Is it better now? Okay. When all else fails, always read instructions, I suppose. As I was saying, Dr. Mueller is the newly appointed deputy to the Undersecretary General for International Agency Affairs and has been with the United Nations for some 25 years. He is most recently as the director of the Executive Office of the Secretary General. Dr. Mueller has a wide range of interests from solar energy to political affairs. He has just completed a book in the field of philosophy, soon to be published by Doubleday, entitled On Happiness. Without further ado, then, I'll give you our second speaker of the evening, Dr. Robert Mueller.
Thank you. Dear friends, it's really not my fault. I tried my best to be here on time, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Lee that he stepped in for me. Norman Cousins, when he called me the other day, sounded so horrible on the phone that it was excluded that he could come and speak here. I intended to do something very great for you, because this is the third time that I'm speaking here in Ames. And the two preceding times have been, as a matter of fact, pretty important for my own thinking, because you had put to me some very vital issues. The first one was on world interdependence. And the speech I gave you at that time was later on published and polished. And it had a wide circulation. As a matter of fact, it was used by Dr. Henry Steele Commager for the preparation of his Declaration of Interdependence, which was adopted on the bicentennial in Philadelphia. And there were some interesting projects that emerged from it. And then later on, you had put to me the question of population and resources. And this led one of your professors, Professor Browning, to invite me to the Phytopathological Association in Houston, where with Dr. Norman Borlaug, again, I had to put my thinking cap on and to think out really the resources of this planet and population. And this speech also has had a wide distribution because I was forced on the basis of my work to give a synthesis of those two very fundamental problems. Now, I intended to do something similar today, but time will not permit me to do it. What I would have liked to do today, and nevertheless I'm going to summarize it quickly for you, because I know how important it is now in universities to think in what is called an interdisciplinary way. So how do you deal with a problem like South Asia? How do I approach it in my own function? You have in front of you someone who, after many, many years in the UN, has inherited the job of coordinating what the various United Nations agencies are doing. Now, there are today 32 of them. And the only way I can cope with this situation, where all these problems from around the world are being discussed in one agency, the only way for me to survive in this situation was to try to find a logical framework on which I could hang everything which is important for me to know. And I want to give you this as students, because it is quite possible that it might facilitate your own work. And I would have taken the whole problems of South Asia as seen from these points of view. within this great framework. I will have to summarize this quite a lot and give you only the essential findings. But more important than many details which you can find in publications which I will mention to you later on, is what I want to tell you as students about the possibility which we are nearing, in my opinion, to have almost a Copernican framework in which everything is beginning to make sense on this planet. Now I'm going to give you my practitioner's approach to this whole affair. In my coordination work, when things come in from the Food Organization, from World Health Organization, from the political field, apartheid, racism, languages, cultures, preservation of the past, futurology, etc., from outer space to microbiology, everything today has internationalized itself, has become a world problem. How do I proceed in order to put some order in this incredible complexity which has been growing year after year, especially since the Second World War? Now, my scheme is the following. In the first place, what I see always in everything that comes to the United Nations, I would put in three categories. And I call them cosmoses, because each of them is a tremendously complex cosmos. The first one is the physical or non-human cosmos. The second one is the social cosmos, and the third one is the cosmos of the individual. And in this cosmology, I would like to say one thing. There are views, of course, of the universe. There are views of the infinitely small. There are views on everything nowadays. But there are only certain things which are relevant to the human condition. And this is where, for me, as a United Nations official, it becomes important. For example, the people who deal with the universe, they tell you that our galaxy is speeding in the universe at the speed of 100 million miles an hour. Fine, but I couldn't care less. That has nothing to do with the practicalities of the problems with which we deal on this planet. It can be, whether it is moving at all, it's another question. I think even the scientists will not be able to answer this. But what is happening, and this is very fundamental, it is in the last 30 years, there are matters which have to deal much beyond this planet, which have become of direct relevance to our fate on this planet. And this starts with the sun and with outer space. And as a matter of fact, I would have taken this immediately as the first category of looking at South Asia, because the whole history of South Asia, the whole future of South Asia, the whole fundamental discussion of South Asia is really a question of the physical cosmos in which it is located, its location under the sun, its climate, its physical composition, etc., etc. Our relations, the relations between this planet and the sun, are something which for me as United Nations official are absolutely fundamental. Most of the things of the settlements on this planet, the almost entirety of the energy problem, be it through photosynthesis or be it through the climate that evaporates the water, brings it into the reservoirs, and we can create hydroelectricity with it. All this is due to the fundamental mechanism of this big motor we have sitting up there, slowly burning hydrogen explosions, which are really making the mechanics of this planet. If you come a little further down, you have outer space. Now, outer space already has become of great relevance to everything that's going on politically and socially. Today, more than 2,000 satellites are floating around this planet. They have to be registered. There are half a dozen of treaties that have been concluded. As a matter of fact, these satellites allow us to understand and to solve many problems which we have on the planet because they come in at the right moment. Relevance to South Asia will ask me, yes, immediate relevance. namely that it was in India that last year you had one of the most fabulous educational satellite programs ever tried on this planet. While in Alaska today you have now education through satellite to about 27 villages, last year in India there were thousands of villages where you could see, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people sitting in front of a receiver and being educated via satellite. It was a prodigious program. I have seen films about it. We have discussed it in United Nations. It was very complex in view of the fact that there is a large linguistic diversity of the country which had to be conquered by the programmers. We come down closer to the planet, we have the climate. Fundamental again for Southeast Asia. One of the great worries we have in the United Nations system today is the climate, the future of the climate of this planet. And within these climatic problems, of course, one is important, is how are the monsoons going to behave towards the Indian subcontinent. And it is one of the places on Earth where major international trouble can happen if you have a wrong harvest, as was the case, as you remember, in 1974, where we got a world food crisis as a result of climatic changes. You come down to the biosphere. From the biosphere, you come to the seas and the oceans, to the continents, to the rivers. I could have told you at least a story of more than an hour on the question of the water system of the Indian subcontinent and this region. The flowering of biology in the tropical and equatorial regions of the world. It is nature itself that has determined how this planet is rich in various species and biological chemistry and so on and so forth. And you can, in this first classification, you can go from outer space down to microbiology and to the atom. You go through everything from the infinitely large to the infinitely small. Again, you will ask me, what kind of relevance does the atom have for South Asia? I can tell you that it has a tremendous relevance because India was a country that years ago had to decide whether it is going to go into atomic science. And it took this option. And today India is becoming one of the atomic powers. It is a country that started with practically no atomic scientists, and today it has a whole crowd of them. It is one of the countries which has a group of atomic scientists which is among the best in the world. So here you have, in your interdependence, the location of a problem like South Asia, or of any country, as a matter of fact. Its insertion as for its place under the sun, its insertion with outer space technology, its insertion in the climate, its continental resources, its water systems, down to potentials of atomic power, genetic engineering, etc., etc. This is what, in one cross-section, this planet is all about. And once you have this physical planet, from infinitely large to infinitely small, you have a second cross-section which goes from the beginnings to the future. Absolutely have this broad framework. If not, you will not understand where your particular science or where your particular country is located in this framework in the universe. Secondly, we have to deal with the social cosmos. Let me say that for the first cosmos, the physical cosmos, the world has not been doing so badly in the last 30 years, because thanks to a host of world conferences, especially since 1970, we have a global knowledge of our planet of which there is no precedent. We know our home. We know our seas and oceans, we know our climate better, we know our continents better. All this has been grasped by the human species in a fantastic statistical and scientific effort, of which, as a matter of fact, the greatest contributors were the highly advanced scientific and technological countries of the North. But that's not all. If you had to deal only with the physics of the planet, we might be doing pretty well. But on this planet, you have another cosmos of an incredible complexity, and it is the human species itself. Now again, as students, you must always start from one fundamental element. It is the world population. There is no other element on this planet that is more important than a good knowledge of world population. This is a must. It's the first rule for every United Nations official. You must know your population distribution. You must know your fertility rates. You must know your death rates. You must know your population projections by area for the total human species. You must know the various assumptions as to the speed declines of the world population. And these are very important elements in the political picture of tomorrow. Now here again, you look at South Asia or at Asia as a whole, and you see how important that looms in the total picture. We are today now 4 billion people. The latest consultations which we had in the United Nations with governments on population policies show that now, in practically all the developing countries except Africa, and still some resistances in Latin America, now a reduction of the fertility is of paramount importance to governments. Dr. Lee has just mentioned Mexico. He's absolutely right. A few years ago, you couldn't speak about population control in Mexico. This is all over. They're testing now with exactly the same practices and laws as in other countries. But in the total picture, out of 6 billion people in the year 2000, there will be 4 billion people in Asia. This is one of the most considerable problems this planet has ever seen. And we have the political consequences of it are going to be enormous. It is the area of the planet where the mushrooming of population is greatest. Now again, if I take the total picture, you have to see it in time. How happened that it is there that you have the largest population concentration? It's very easy. This is where the first people were born. This is where you had the first great rivers, the Yangtze, the Ganges, the Indus, and down to Mesopotamia, the Nile. This is where the first humans lived. This is where they could survive. And they could survive because they didn't freeze in the winter and because they could harvest a few things along the rivers. So when the second population explosion started in the 50s, this is where you had your largest population basis. This is where, in any case, 2/3 of the world people were living. And they were, of course, increasing at a certain rate, but nature was taking care of it by having a very high death rate. And then what happened, what was the cause of the whole world population explosion and of its dramatic effects in Asia, is the fact that the Western societies, out of human concern, your conference speaks about human dignity. The World Health Organization, the Rockefeller Foundation, Point 4, felt that one couldn't let those babies die. This happened immediately after the Second World War. And as a result, the death rate in the developing countries, and especially in Asia, collapsed, if I may say so. Those children were saved, and at that time, since nobody had any idea of what the acceleration, what the consequences would be, we only wanted to save children. It's not me. As a result, then, someone disagreeing outside. Well, there are all kinds of strange noises here in Ames. Well, let me make another try. Maybe the heckler stops somewhere. As a result, then, the death rate collapsed. And you know, that is something which is very important. The fertility rate on this planet has never really increased since the pre-war period. It has declined everywhere, but very slowly. But what you had is a complete collapse of the death rate. And this then has created a world population situation where, and I checked again the latest figures, where more than 50% of the populations of Asia are less than 21 years old. They were all born and they all survived during this baby boom of the 50s due to new health measures. And of course, when you have a population less than 21 years old, you have a highly reproductive population. They all want to have children, and this is why the population problem cannot be solved so easily at all. And one of the major problems we have today in the United Nations is that while this is decelerating only very slowly, we have now a major concern with the aging and with the losing of population in the advanced countries. You know that we have now 17 countries in the West and also the East, the socialist countries, which are now losing populations. In other words, the reproductive capacity has diminished to such a point that now the total populations are diminishing. And as a matter of fact, our latest questionnaire to governments about what are your population concerns has revealed that out of 21 developed countries, 20 countries have replied that their major concern is the decline of their populations. Whereas the majority of all the developing countries has replied to us that the major problem is to get the fertility down. There are only now in the world a few countries, usually in Africa, and a few Latin American ones, especially Brazil and Argentina, which have large territories, which find that the population problem, that they have insufficient populations. Now, once you have your human species as a whole, its development, its future, and our estimates are still going up to between 9.4 billion and 15 billion people in 100 years from now. You can imagine what a problem this is for this planet. Everything else is secondary compared with this fundamental problem. So to listen to speeches like that of Dr. Lee is absolutely the right thing to do when it comes to Asia. Now, once you have this enormous concentration of 2/3 of the human species in Asia. Now, this is of great concern to the West because it's the masses of the developing countries which are beginning to coalesce. China is for the Soviet Union our developing world. They do not know what tomorrow will bring, how the pressures of Asia is going to be. Even in the Soviet Union, the European Soviet people are declining, whereas the Asian people in the Soviet Union are increasing, like developing countries. So you have immense political problems which are involved in all this. But that's not all. Humans are grouped in 1,000 ways. Races, beliefs, ideologies, borders, in nations, religions, whatever you have, transnational corporations, you cannot imagine. Now, when you come to Asia, there you have a diversity of groupings which is almost endless, because it is in Asia that you have the largest number of languages on earth. It is there that you have the largest number of religions on earth. For anyone who has lived in India, you will see that every conceivable god has been invented or produced by India. That hundreds of languages are there, and where for a country to rule people with such diverse languages, it's really a phenomenal problem. But still you have these people, they are grouped, and in addition they have to take a position between the powerful Soviet Union on the one hand and the very powerful United States on the other hand. They have to choose sometimes their technologies, their alliances. As a matter of fact, most of Asia, with the exception of Japan, Vietnam, Taiwan and Korea, has been trying to find its own way in a non-aligned group. Sri Lanka is one of the countries that is trying to give a new initiative in thinking. One of my colleagues is just leaving tomorrow to go to a conference on communications. How can the developing world have a greater say in world communications, and so on and so forth. And you have these groupings, the social cosmos, which is in flux, and which you have to try to make live in peace, building bridges between them, down to the family, which has its own life, its own cosmos in this whole affair. Now, last but not least, I would like to quickly speak of the last of these categories, into which you have to bring everything, which is the individual human being. And I would advise you as students never to believe that this cosmos is worth less than all the other cosmoses. I have learned in my life that this is just not correct. The same way as our planet in the universe is invisible. It's nothing, it's a speck, it's like nothing. The whole universe can live without planet Earth. But when you come close to it, it is a planet of a fantastic complexity, which our scientists are unable to grasp. They are even unable to get down to the genetic code, which is down there in the DNA. We are finding new particles year after year. It is one of the most incredible, complicated cosmoses you can imagine. And the same applies to the human species. But when you come down to an individual human being, you find again a cosmos which is as complicated, as rich, as diverse as is this entire planet. It almost seems that everything has a life of its own, a justification of its own, a complexity of its own. And this is why in the United Nations, whatever you do, whenever you speak about nations or the totality of the world population, etc., you are always drawn back to this alpha and omega, namely the individual. Not a single individual on this planet has ever existed before in the same form. And never again in all eternity will exactly the same human being be born again. Now, I leave this thought with you so that you understand this tremendous complexity of which we are becoming aware on this planet. Now, when it comes to the individual, how does the individual fare in all this? How does an individual fare in the Western world, and how does he fare in Asia? Now, here again, you can build a whole cosmology. To begin with, the length of life, which he can expect. Absolutely fundamental. On this planet, people are born in certain countries where they have an average life expectancy to 70 years. As a matter of fact, now the maximum seems to have been reached, and we're beginning to see a diminishing, at least for life expectancy of males in the Western world. But the young man in Africa, he might say, why do I live only 35 years? In India, why do I live only 50 years? This life expectancy, as a matter of fact, has increased over the years. The dignity or length of life has also increased. Now, this is the first question, where you have still enormous inequalities in this world. Then, when you come to the human being, I have learned something from an Asian which has been very helpful to me. It was former Secretary General U Thant. He was a Burmese, a very devout Buddhist. He was a wonderful man, a man who sometimes made me feel ashamed to be a Westerner, because he was such a deep human being. I have learned so much from him during the few years I have worked with him. And for him, it was always the individual that counted. And for each individual, he had a very simple classification. People sometimes laughed at it, and I'm sure that many sociologists would not agree with it. But he always and religiously spoke about the 4 characteristics and needs of man: the physical needs, the mental or intellectual needs, the moral needs, and the spiritual needs. And he had a classification of the 4, namely that intellectual was more important than physical, that moral was more important than mental, and that spiritual was the most important of all. At the beginning, I smiled a little bit, little primitive classifications, but the more I looked at this, went into it, I discovered that this is exactly the human story. It's again the cosmos as seen from the individual person. You are here in an agricultural university, but I don't have to tell you how important the switch has been lately from agriculture to nutrition. Today, nutrition is problem number 1. What are the physical inputs? What is the maximization of the physical life of an individual by giving it the proper inputs in order to maximize this life? What are the poisons? What is the deleterious material that is not going to make the individual function properly? And this can go from alcohol to tobacco to synthetics to all the chemicals which are put into food. And it can go to the environment, namely the wrong air which we breathe, the wrong water which we are being served. This is really the crux of the whole matter. This is the beginning. Namely, how does this individual once born get the maximum life from the physical point of view? And there, of course, in the West, we have gone very far, whereas in the developing countries, this is their first priority. And this is why they come to the United Nations and they don't speak much about spirituality, but they say, we want food, we want health, we want hospitals. This is number 1 of our requirements. And these are the priorities which we see in the United Nations. And what is the second priority? Second priority, you're speaking here about dignity. The first dignity of a human being is to have a minimum of education. How can you appreciate life? How can you appraise life if you do not know a minimum about the planet on which you live? And this is education. And this is why the second priority again, which Asia is bringing to the United Nations, is education. And still in some of these countries today, not more than 30% of the people can go to schools. So they come to UNESCO. We want education in order to have a minimum of dignity. And when you compare our Western countries, when you compare a university like yours, when I compare what my children can learn in American universities, it is a world. It is an expansion of the knowledge of the individual into the infinitely large and the infinitely small. This is human dignity. It is more than human dignity. It is the multiplication. It's the aggrandizement of the human. A little human on this planet, but who has a knowledge that goes far into the infinitely large and the infinitely small. And this is what these people would also like. Now, on the moral side and on the spiritual side, U Thant always said that there the Westerners have something to learn from the Asians. And I would like to say this here very specifically. I have worked with many Asians in the United Nations, and I can tell you that there is very little doubt about the fact that when it comes about the inner functioning of man, they are far advanced of everyone in the West. I think psychiatry in the West is the first basement of what any Hindu guru knows. the first baseman. This is primitive. Any Swami, any guru knows more than a Western psychiatrist. They have been studying this in solitude, in meditation, for thousands of years. These people have a religious perception which is absolutely incredible. And the dream of U Thant was always, as he put it, to bring East and West together. He felt that the West was too scientific, too materialistic, not moral enough, and very little spiritual. But he considered that the East had the other defaults, namely spirituality was rampant everywhere in his own country, Burma, etc., etc. But the people were dying of hunger and did not have the type of education that was needed in order to solve their problems. Unfortunately, he died, and he, except for his memoirs, which are going to come out in a few weeks, he didn't leave us these ethics for our time, which he had dreamt of writing. But here I must say that we in the West, we have a lesson to receive from these people. And this is why when you look at the world as a whole, and when you think of the future and of the flowering of the human being, in order to get closer to the divinity, it's not only dignity, it is the human story is the search of the understanding of the universe, of the secrets of life. And most of the time we are getting there only through poetry, through sentiment, through elevation, through belief in God or in religion. This is the greatest and most beautiful part of the human story, and there I think the Asians have a lot to teach us. And recently we can see again in United Nations a certain revolt of the developing countries who are beginning to assert their own individuality, Africans and others, and who come to the United Nations and say, look, with all your materialism, with all your knowledge, with all your rationalism, we do not have the impression that you can solve the problems of the world. And this is why very often our traditional methods, our beliefs, our poetry, our languages, our culture have a much greater value than you led us to believe. Now this is, in a nutshell, I cannot speak much longer, but I wanted to give you a broad framework within which the problem of South Asia unfolds. It is a considerable problem. It's a particular region of this planet. It has magnificent potentialities. If I had the time to speak about all I wanted to tell you, I could have talked to you, for example, of the possibilities of developing the Brahmaputra, one of the greatest engineering projects of this planet. I knew very well the Minister of Hydroelectricity of India when I was Associate Director of the Resources Division in the UN. Here is a man who is now implementing in India an old dream of the Vedas, namely that the Ganges water will flow to the southern tip of India. It is being done. The water picture of India can be a prodigious one as long as they do not let the water flood the Calcutta area and can capture it, and through a system of waterworks, electricity works and dam, bring it to the south of India. Of course, one of the great difficulties they had is that when Bangladesh became independent, Bangladesh brought to the United Nations, was last year the General Assembly, the question of the diversion of the Ganges waters by India. But this is being solved too. There are so many things which can be done in Asia. And I must say that a country like India in particular has all the intelligence, it has all the scientists. Asia is a prodigious area of the world in terms of intelligence. I've been in China with Secretary General Waldheim when he was invited there for the first time. It is incredible, the scientific and technological inclination of these people. Of course, they are so numerous that they had to start from an agricultural basis, but they can learn anything. The Japanese have demonstrated in the world how they were able to acquire most of the Western technologies and even very often to beat us. It is a tremendous human story on this planet. It has become immensely complex in the last few years. But to conclude, I would tell you that being now in the UN since 1948, that makes almost 30 years, I have seen the human species organize itself, create one agency after the other, probe its planet, bring the pyramid of all the knowledge which you have in your university. If somewhere in the world something becomes important, a new discovery that is hopeful is being done, it pops up immediately at the Food and Agricultural Organization. We have today a whole system of agencies which are beginning to be the brain of the human species, probing its planet, correcting errors which have been made. And my God, have there been errors, in particular in the field of population, in the field of energy, in the field of water, in the field of food. All these errors were committed because we really didn't have the courage to grasp the total globality of our problems. And yet in all this, in the middle of the nonsense, in the middle of the $350 billion of armaments, in the middle of the violations of human rights, in the middle of non-existing democracies, which is one of the subjects about which you will hear, people not knowing who is representing them. Nevertheless, in all this nonsense, I have very often the impression that we are, as a species on this planet, in a period of momentous importance for the whole evolution. I think that tomorrow, historians, when they will look back, they will say that in the millions of years of evolution of living species on this planet, something happened in the 70s. Something happened at the end of this 20th century, where everything coalesced, everything mushroomed, and then a series of crises came, a series of new thinking, sanctity of life that existed for thousands of years suddenly was challenged, everything was challenged, and that a new period had to start where we had to create new values, we had to find new equilibria, we had to rethink our entire place, realizing the individual in this complex planet of which the knowledge had increased so tremendously as a result of science and technology. The more I go on, the more I learn, the more I get information from all those agencies, the more I've come to the conclusion that this is probably the most prodigious period in the entire human history. And my advice to you would be this: you cannot live in your particular science without opening your mind and heart in every direction. You must develop a new art, which is to see what are the major currents. Sciences are being wiped out overnight because people were closed, had built walls around the science and felt that it could live on for thousands of years. Not true. No nation is going to live for thousands of years. No science is going to live for thousands of years. Most of the sciences in universities are all Greek words which have no meaning at all. And sometimes it would be good to ask a Hindu what kind of faculty he would establish. So it is important to be open in every direction. Of course, it's difficult, but you must become a universal person. You must be open in every direction and to see the interrelationship of what you study, be it a clam or a shrimp or a DNA. This is all related in a cosmos, in many cosmoses. And you must understand how it relates and what the great currents are. One of the reasons, as a matter of fact, why today in the political world there is so much mediocrity, there is very little vision, there is very little courage for the future, there is very little decision to grasp the whole human condition in its totality. And it is precisely because political men have not been trained to see the totality. They are parochial, they are scared, They do not want to open their minds to new options. They want to protect what they have. But you are the younger generations, and when you come into power tomorrow, you must be open-minded. You must know that this is a little planet with fantastic interdependencies, that these changes are taking place months by month, that errors have to be corrected, and that the human species has to learn how to walk, so to speak. It is the birth of something new. You know, sometimes I feel that if people do not understand really what is going on, it's because when something new is being born, you never have the consciousness of it. A baby in the womb of a mother doesn't know that it lives. We do not remember the first few years of our lives. It is later that we perceive what life is. And the birth of this global collectivity, the emergence of the human species as one species now, is not sufficiently understood because it is a birth, and therefore so few people understand it. But in the last few years, I think this has come increasingly to the fore, and I'm convinced that soon we are going to see, for the first time, also the birth of an all-human family in which the various groups will have to live together in greater peace, in greater justice, and in greater dignity. I thank you very much.
Certainly, both presentations tonight have been very informative and very eloquent. We will now take a few questions. You can direct either your question to both gentlemen or either Dr. Lee or Dr. Mueller.